Chickens. Today on Dead Dodge Garage, the original 340 from Dale's Demon. What's wrong with it? Well, couple things. If you've watched my recent videos on this car, you know I swapped this 360 that I built into the Demon because the 340 was in need of some attention. I have to say I was expecting a lot more consternation? Controversy? I thought people would be annoyed that I put a 360 in a car that says that on it. Apparently no one really minds, so that's great. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that I really like Chrysler small blocks. Like I really like them. They're one of my favorite things in the universe. And it just so happens that currently I have every single size of Chrysler small block that was ever built in my shop. A 273, a 318, of course, at least one. We'll call the Magnum 318 bonus. The 360, of course. I've got two of them, but they're both in cars. In fact, the other one's here in this Barracuda. And we'll definitely talk about that someday soon. And of course, the shining star among them, the legendary 340. Although there were performance versions of the 273 and the 360, all of these engines, except for one, lived lives as day-to-day, bread-and-butter, normal transportation engines. Except the 340. The 340 was special. The 340 had one job, and that was making high horsepower at a high RPM. From 68 to 71, this was a high compression, snarling, high output, darling of a little engine. 72 and 3 are lower compression, and mid-year 72, they also got a cast crank. But for those four model years, 68, 9, 70, and 71, these things were amazing, and they earned the reputation that they've got. That reputation? A big block killer. Put that up next to the 383. Which one are you gonna take? The power potential difference? Not very much. This turns higher RPM, it's smaller, and it weighs less. Tough call.
They went from fiddly to fid to squid dog. And now I just refer to him as the squid.
And all that without ever moving.
No. Fire, fiddly, fire!
Oh, I just remembered there are actually two 340s here. Sorry, Rob. So anyway, the 340, an engine well known for punching above its class. How did it do that? High compression, an aggressive camshaft, and an excellent cylinder head. Of course, these Edelbrock heads are not the factory J heads that this thing would have had, but you know, they're in the same neighborhood. In factory configuration, the 340 achieved its higher compression ratio by using a positive deck height piston, a piston that stuck up out of the hole into the open chamber of the cylinder head. Now obviously this engine has those aftermarket Edelbrock heads. It also has a chrome oil pan and a fancy aftermarket balancer. It's using a performance camshaft. Other than that, it's basically all stock. It's currently wearing a set of non-adjustable factory stamped steel rockers. That's because the crane roller rockers that were in here didn't really fit with the Edelbrock heads. The push rods rubbed on the little openings there and they just didn't line up nicely. Pushrod tube clearance wasn't a problem with the crane rockers and these factory iron 360 heads on this engine, but I did still have to clearance the rockers so they had enough room amongst themselves to not rub and move freely. I removed this engine from the Demon for, well, three reasons. The first reason is leaking oil, and leaking oil on the drag strip is bad. I think I've figured out why that was happening. Outside of a factory intake manifold and head combination, it's pretty standard practice to throw the cork end seals away and just seal the China wall with silicone. That's what I do. The problem is, it didn't actually reach all the way into the corner, so you can see right there a trail that crankcase vapors and oil were able to escape through. You can see a matching trail right here. There's just a spot there where the silicone didn't reach. So that's the main problem. You can see there oil streaming down the front of the block, some of which I tried wiping off at one point. But the oil pan gasket isn't in the best shape either. That front rubber is all dry rotted and cracked up, so that needed to go one way or another. Oh, okay. So also, the casting of the block goes back here to meet this port, but the intake doesn't. So that strip of silicone that was there didn't come anywhere close to this corner. Huh, there actually was silicone out to the other corner, but there was still a trail of oil. This engine has just kind of behaved strangely since I got the car. It has this weird hesitation. It just doesn't rev freely. It doesn't feel right, if that makes sense. So I'm interested to see, are the timing marks wrong? That might explain it. Before getting into all that, I think we'll pull the heads off and see what's what there. I do want to look at this real quickly. I actually showed the top edge of this with the intake still on in the first Demon video. That's not good. And it clearly came apart right here. There must have been a split. That means it's had a vacuum leak to crankcase this whole time. And you can actually look and see there are stains right there, like from gas dripping through that gap. So that's interesting. Another reason why I removed this engine, an intermittent tick. And I believe it's isolated to one of these two lifters. I'm thinking it's this one. That's the one that had a binding rocker arm. If you're interested in the problems I found with the valve train soon after I got the car, you can go back and look at that. There's one video called Diagnosing Top End Noise in my 1971 Dodge Demon 340. There's another one about fixing it. Any videos that I have on this car are in the playlist called Dale's Demon, so check that out. I don't notice anything wrong with this lifter immediately. It's definitely not wiping out, and it actually is pumped up. It's not all loose and floppy, so that's interesting. And same with the intake lifter. These fancy valve springs with dampers would have come in a match set with this camshaft, I'm sure. So I'll probably keep all of those components together. And since the lifters appear to be fine, I'll probably keep them in order and we'll reuse this stuff eventually. It'll come as no surprise here. This engine is equipped with nice ARP head bolts. Kind of greasy. This is a special set of open chamber Edelbrock heads for the 340. On the driver's side deck here, there is some interesting staining, especially in the middle there. It almost looks like the gasket didn't crush as well, but I do see a fairly nice fire ring. So I don't think it was blown or anything, but it's interesting. I'm assuming the gold is copper coat. Interestingly enough, it seemed to stick to all the metal surfaces very nicely, but not to the gasket at all. And here's the passenger side head. Looks about the same. Interestingly enough, very similar deposits on all cylinders, although there's a bit of a wash here on number 8. That's interesting. Number 4 would have been the one with the torn port around the intake there. And it doesn't look like it was super lean or even really eating oil. Maybe the gasket was busted, but holding together, just barely? There's definitely nothing wrong with these heads. They have a port match to the Edelbrock intake gasket here. I suspect that was also done on the intake. No, actually the intake was left at the smaller size. I'm a little disappointed these are the open chamber because I did have an idea for them. More on that later. Without the straight edge, it's really hard to tell, but with it, you can see there how far out of the hole the dome is. It's not a lot, but it's a little. It's enough to do something. And you can tell by the shapes of those raised areas why you can't use a closed chamber head, or even a smaller open chamber head, because the piston will just run into it. There really isn't anything wrong with this engine. There's still nice cross thatching there. The bores look really good. It could use a cleaning, but nothing major. All of the cam lobes look great. All of the lifters are fine. Look at this. They're actually the oil through style. As I understand, that's an AMC lifter. The dimensions are the same as a Chrysler, but it has an oil through provision because those ones are oiled through the push rods. That's cool because you could use them to retrofit a Magnum head to this LA engine. I'm not going to do that, but that would be pretty cool. This thing really just needed a reseal and new freeze plugs, desperately. But the intermittent tick concerned me a good bit, and I still haven't seen a real cause for that. All the lifters I've looked at look fine. About half of these lifters compress slightly when pushed. The other half don't move at all. None of them, sank to the bottom. None of the little cups stuck in there. I have had the thought that it could be pushrod length related. Maybe some of those really were too long and they were bottoming the little cups out in the lifters. But it seemed to make the same noise with the old setup, so... Got the water pump off, and this is interesting. I don't think that corrosion is from having straight water in here for the last 9 months. Well, maybe it is. Man, I haven't actually shown you one step so far. Well, here, let's pull the balancer. Okay. Yay, we did it. Hey, this is interesting. I drained this engine when it was on the lift, but, well, I found more oil. Here's something special to the 340 and high-performance 360s in some applications, the windage tray. The windage tray is supposed to keep oil from getting grabbed by the crank and flung everywhere, and it's supposed to be good for a few horse ponies. You can just see the factory forged crank in there. It's looking good. I think it's cut 1010 if I remember correctly. And here we are in the timing chain area, where I found something fancy that I've never used before. Timing chain tensioner. I believe that's the factory style piece used on 3.9 liter engines actually. Oh, and this is interesting. As part of the bracket that mounts it, there's a heavier duty oil guide tray thing. So that's pretty neat. Well, so much for that theory. The dots align perfectly, and unlike some of these three-way adjustable timing sets, the markings are actually quite easy to understand. That says 0, 0. The triangle over here, I believe, is 4 degrees advanced, and the square over here, 4 degrees retarded. So it's installed straight up. I mean, it's good news. It's just, I don't know. I was hoping to find something obviously wrong, and I haven't. Now, I'll definitely pull the windage tray and check a couple bearings, make sure everything's good there. This oil was pretty nasty, and I have some concerns, but so far everything's looking great. I see nothing scary, no obvious smoking guns. So now that we're at this point, I'd like to talk about my plans for this engine. Dale's Demon has been a drag car from, not day 1, but like day 366? It's in original paint, with mostly original parts, and it shows under 86,000 miles on the odometer. Although I'm not terribly good at it, I do enjoy drag racing, and I really like that the car is set up to do that. Despite various commenters' opinions, I have no intentions of removing the Craigers in favor of the factory rally wheels. However, I own all of the factory engine compartment bits. I own the special air cleaner, I own the pulleys, I own the factory 340 valve covers, I own the thermoquad. It's here somewhere. I own the factory dual point distributor. I own the rusty original exhaust manifolds. I've got it all. And one day, I'd like to put it back on this car. I think. You see, the class this car competed in was called Stock Eliminator, and it had to do that with all stock components. In fact, it was quite successful doing that, so I think I'd be doing just fine if I put factory heads and intake and probably the thermoquad and the air cleaner and all that stuff back on here. If I've learned one thing from this engine, it's that factory type iron heads can deliver perfectly acceptable performance. Honestly, blind taste test between the two, I couldn't tell you which of these engines had the aluminum on them. I have the numbers matching engine, and it just seems like the thing to do. Put it back to how it was supposed to be, with a nice, shiny, fresh coat of orange paint. I don't know what to think on this lifter tick thing. I'd be inclined to leave this cam alone except for that. Now, of course, we'd save these perfectly good aluminum Edelbrock heads for future batches. They are configured for a domed piston that sticks out of the hole, though. They're not the closed chamber ones I'm used to. I have another crazy harebrained scheme involving this 273. I was strongly considering using those aluminum heads on here, although there's a bit of a problem with that because the bore in the 273 is tiny, and the intake valves in the aluminum Edelbrock heads are huge. So it's pretty common to have to notch the bores so those valves have room to live and be happy. Armed with that knowledge, I'm a lot more inclined to use these closed chamber 302 casting heads. The formula for this build would be high compression, solid roller, extremely high RPM, roller everything, you know? I want to spin 7,500 with the small block. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. I don't think I'd do that with these factory heads and that special D4B intake. So they can go. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The 340, it's awesome, no matter how it's set up. And it'll be very awesome with factory heads. So that's kind of the direction I'm planning to go with this. I think I can enjoy it in this configuration with this spicy 360 for the racing season this year. Maybe next year, you know. We'll see where that goes. In fact, there are a couple other things I want to try while it's in here. And by a couple other things, of course, I mean a couple other things. Both of these small block builds I have in mind are probably way off in the future. I've got several other projects coming to the channel soon that should serve pretty well to fill the gap. I do still need to pick up the stock heads and intake. They're actually on the 318 that was in the Demon for about 30 years. I should probably go pick those up before, Dale rolls them into the scrap pile.
The fluffy one.
What is going on here?
Tap.
Anyway, thanks for watching. Tune in next time for more small block Mopar stuff, more A-bodies, and probably more baby chickens, I guess. Good night.